lort vips. Det var en vips. En vips. Ja. Det var bare en lortevips. Jeg har set Mia Andersen i rumvæsen. Det er fint nok. Så er hun underholdt. Så kan jeg streame i fred. I fred. Uden mere.
It's a fucking sickness, bro. Teknisk set, så er pædofili en seksualitet. Den er bare ikke accepteret. And I guess why. Ej, de er ikke mere. Katte er kloge. Rockmusik på det lokale bibliotek. Sådan. Søn er i dagpleje. Nå, fed. Overlevet skud i hovedet. Nice. Yes. Identify yourself. Poor son of a bitch. Go! And don't come back till you find him. Where is he? Search there.
Ja, det ved jeg mere.
This area's clear. I'm moving on. Hold up.
Den er sådan en rumvægtig spil, men jeg laver en joy.
I'm in the building. Can you see what's ahead?
The layout shows a wide-open indoor plaza.
More guards, no doubt.
Oh, those hacks I uploaded to your phone? It's a perfect distraction. You can disrupt the equipment of any guard in there.
Equipment like what?
Anything. Hack their phones, earpieces, explosives. Everything runs off computer chips these days.
Okay, I'll try it. You scan me the offices. Find me someone with an unsecured laptop.
Got one. Bradley Coughlin. Oh no. He's a security director.
Of course he is. Once I hack in, you move fast. Track or call it and get out. It won't take long for security to spot the intrusion.
Don't worry about me.
Næsten god. Næsten god.
lot outside of Blue's X-Labs. Billions of dollars and science. Okay, maybe just regular science, but still, man. Who knows what kind of wild shit I'll get to work out. I still gotta sign a mountain of confidentiality paperwork.
Ej, pjuske!
I will tell you all about it when I am done. Yes, 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 yes.
Ja. Hvad så MB? Velkommen til. Hey, what up? Hvad så MB? Velkommen til. Hey.
It's a mate. What up, boy? What up, bro? How we doing?
For helvede rumvæsen. Hvad laver du, lille bror? Jeg laver lidt pænt, bror. En klassiker. Vi har også lidt smidt af fejl. Vi skal lige have et glas. Vi har pizza slice, chips, boosters og faxe. Så kører det. Hvad laver du i dag? Skål.
Du er lidt til at ramme, men det lykkedes. Velkommen til en video på min kanal. Det skal smage Fanta Zero. Woo! Man Amanda! Yeah! I dag, der skal vi smage Monster, of course. Viking Berry, because here in Scandinavia, vi er vikinger, eller vi er bare vikinger. Nu er vi bare nogle folksfans, der har
Hvad, Jonas?
Woo! Man Amanda! Yeah! I dag, der skal vi smage Monster, of course. Viking Berry, because here in Scandinavia, vi er vikinger, eller vi er bare vikinger. Nu er vi bare nogle folksfans, der har nogen derude. Og tør invadere England igen. Joke for fuck's sake. Det var en anden tid. Det var en anden tid. For helvede. Nej, vi kunne godt lige tage en tur mere til England og invadere de røvler derovre, ikke? Fordi vi er jo vikingerne. Igen, det er selvfølgelig bare gas. Det er gas. And you can take it. Because it's a joke. Aha. Ultra Viking, eller ikke ultra, bare Viking Berry. Sådan her ud. Og mærket ligger lige oven på ulven, men Finlandsulven er der. Woo! Man Amanda, velkommen tilbage. Man Amanda, hvad så fuck? Velkommen tilbage til Man Amanda. Jeg troede der ikke var flere nye monster, det er der heller ikke. Problemet var bare, at jeg glemte, at jeg havde den her. Den har jeg lige fundet i køleren.
Det er sådan noget der, jeg nogle gange er glad for, at jeg ikke snakker med Jonas mere, ikke? Også fordi folk der kender, eller kendte mig, hvad det hedder, og stadig kender Jonas, ikke? Men når de kommer stadig og fortæller bare, Jonas på det der, jeg er sgu da ligeglad. Altså ærligt for noget. Selv Markus kommer nogle gange fortælle om Jonas, ikke? Jeg siger, Markus, jeg er ligeglad. Hvor rager det mig? I sidste ende, ja, det er noget barnligt noget, vi vender over, ikke? Men det hedder. I sidste ende, og så, men det hedder. Men alligevel, så magter jeg bare ikke mere. Han har spillet sin chance. Jonas har ikke hjernesat nok til at forstå, at jeg dropper ham. Drop mig, men det er andre fortrydet. Jeg tror ikke, jeg er en kronelsker. Det er ikke det, jeg tror på. Puff.
G'day there, new Aussie Super Serum. For 100 hours of moisturised hair and a wave of endless moisture that goes on and on and on. Just let it melt away. So you do the life thing and let Aussie do the hair thing. We call it the Aussie philosophy. Aussie Super Serum. Have you tried it yet?
Næste sammen med den video. I dag skal vi...
Løb for helvede!
Stop kameraet.
Nej, det er det, Byen. Kom!
Kom og smag rumvæsen. Sådan der smag. Lad os gå passe på.
Er det godt? Er det godt? Er det godt? Jeg troede lige, den var på dig, mand, der.
Det her.
Det er lækkert! Det er lækkert! Hvad siger vi? 8 ud af 10. Nej, ved du hvad?
9 ud af 10.
9,2 ud af 10.
Han som er et eller andet ord, det er noget.
Ja, det er nødt til. Sluk til kameraet.
Sluk til kameraet.
Yeah, passenger, pass coffee. Let's go, baby. Here we go. Jeg åbner op af muren til du ikke tager op her. Dine katter lige så flotte, jeg er Sverige imponeret. Jeg har brug for dig, for jeg vil knæppe dig, yeah. Sover med en chill, værende bag, bruger ikke gå med en børn er en baby. Jeg har aldrig haft din sex.
Hey, goddag. Min var blød, fordi du skal have død. Hvad mener du, Kasper? Hvad? Hvad fanden mener du? Jeg troede, du ved. Hvad fanden mener du, mand? Jeg tror også, du ved. Bakke. Tag sig lidt over, Ja, tak for introen, Kasper. Vi er på bakke igen. I dag, endnu en bakketur. Afsted.
Oh shit. Kom. Au.
Pas på, Pjuske. Så tøser. Kæft, du er fuld, mand. Kul om hej, jo.
Hvad skal du med en lykke?
Det er skive, du.
Det er ikke Jonas' lejlighed.
Pjuske har aldrig været herinde før. Hvad tager lige kameraet, mand?
Så? Jeg skal give et nummer. Giv et nummer.
Ja, Patrick.
Jeg skal give et nummer.
Hej. Nå, nu skal du høre historien om det her rum herinde. Om lastrummet. Der er en rotte. Den er dernede. Men i gamle dage, der kørte den frem. Og der...
Corona.
Der er Patrick.
Giv et nummer med, Patrick. Start med Danmark Gruppen. Kom her. Vi skal videre.
Kom. Jeg var stadig ved at vælge der. Det vigtigste er, at du rammer Asmus i hovedet.
Der er sådan noget is. Italiensk is. Bakkens bedste is.
Bakken, fysik!
Jeg har fået skovbær, passion og mango og dyrehave. Hvad har du fået?
Jeg har fået mint, begge chokolade og argentinsk karamel.
Hvad har du fået?
Jeg har fået vigt, det er sådan mørk chokolade, og så har jeg fået bananstøt.
Jeg har altså begge chokolader også sådan noget nu, og så noget jordbær og noget jordbær her.
Jordbær
Jordbær.
Ja, jordbær godt.
Jeg vil spise også is, sådan så. Så vi går lidt mere tilbage, så er den bedre ind i frame. Ja, den var tilbage. Sådan der. Så kan man se der bedre.
Jeg smager lige den der lemon der, den er god.
Er den god?
Ja. Lækker. 10 ud af 10.
10 ud af 10. 11 ud af 10.
Fuck Jonas Dahl Pedersen.
Hvad siger du?
9 ud af 10. Jeg kan ikke lige give noget 10 ud af 10. Fordi så er der ikke noget, der er bedre.
Og det er der. Der er sikkert noget, der er bedre det her.
Ja,
Det er det, jeg mener. 9 ud af 10, det er fucking godt. Jeg kan ikke finde noget, der er bedre end 10.
hvad giver du?
Det er godt.
Hvad giver du?
12 ud af 10.
9.
I går fra rumvæsen, vi blev sure på ham. Ja. Ja, det var dumt. Ja, kom med. Jeg kan sove med Sigurd. Ja.
God damn!
Skal vi se en... Ja, hej far. Ja, hej far. Kan du ikke høre mig? Ja, hallo? Ja, hallo? Hallo? Ja, hallo?
Vi har lavet unboxing første gang i flere år. Den skorter vi. Vi har reageret, vi har stemt til guldtuben, vi har lavet musik.
Og jeg må sige se vores aftenrutine, det er faktisk ikke
ikke Pokémon Go, det er tjekket, noget mad på en måde, ja. Den der, ja, og så noget Canvas synes jeg kan bare sidde. Jeg er lidt forsinket her.
Ja, hallo?
Ja, hallo.
Ja, hallo?
Hører du?
Jeg kan godt høre. Sådan der.
Hej, velkommen. Hej. Min morgenrutine for 100 likes, så nu skal vi lave en aftenrutine. Yay, og jeg er med. Så nu skal vi fortælle om vores lille aften. Yay. Så hver gang aften, så sidder jeg på min Mac, fordi jeg har ikke noget andet at lave.
Ja.
Hvad er der, Jonas?
Skal du have aftensmad?
Og så smider jeg Jonas ud. Det er sådan, jeg kan tage det sammen, når han skal lave mad.
Det er altid mig, der skal lave mad, men jeg kan ikke finde ud af det. Så har jeg lavet din pasta og kødsovs.
Det er ikke pasta og kødsovs. Gå ud og lave det ordentligt.
Græder hver dag i badet.
Jonas har en eller anden mærkelig grund til at altid stjæle min hat.
Du må lige snakke om, hvis jeg skal lave mad, ikke? Så skal jeg have den her. Det er min madhat. Jeg stjæler hatten, fordi det får mig til at føle, at jeg kan score damer.
Hov, klokken er 9. Hvorfor er Jonas af med min mad?
Jeg må stjæle noget mad. Jeg er nødt til at stjæle noget mad, for at kan gøre Christian tilfreds.
Er det arbejde? Sulten. Klokken er 10. Hvad laver Jonas nu? Det tager Jonas 100 år at lave mad, så det er altid med, at jeg bestiller noget for takeaway. Hallo, jeg vil gerne bestille nachos.
Så, jeg har lavet mad til dig. Jeg er dygtig.
har ikke lavet det her mad, Jonas.
Hvad mener du?
Du laver ikke så god mad.
Jeg er sko.
Og Jonas, jeg vil til takeaway.
Som vi plejer.
Som vi plejer.
Yay! Jeg har lyst til at lave videoer hver dag. Kan vi lave en video?
Vi har kun videoer på, når vi har arbejdsrutine.
Men... Jamen, skal vi ikke lave en?
Om en time, Jonas. Det kan jeg godt lave. Vent lige lidt. Jeg kan komme 3 om morgenen. Har det taget os 4 timer at spise aftensmad? Jeg overrasker over, hvor det tager så lang tid at spise, hver gang Jonas sover her. Som vi plejer.
Som vi plejer.
Nå, vi skal i seng nu med Jonas. Vi optager i morgen.
Okay.
Men nu er det på tide at børste tænder, så må vi optage i morgen. Bubibjerg!
Hopper ned og videre. Jeg forstår ikke, at vi skal synge i bad, altså når vi tænder.
Bubibjerg!
Hopper ned og videre.
Jeg er træt.
Det er godt. Sov?
Yes. Hvad er klokken, Jonas?
8.
Fuck, det er allerede morgen.
Ja.
Vi har ikke sovet hele natten.
Vi har ikke sovet siden 2016, som vi plejer.
Så er det klart.
Det er standard.
Nå, vi skulle lave det morgenmad.
Yay!
Vi har bare været op hele natten nu, bare på en lille ting. Så det er sikkert, at vi er oppe for noget morgenmad. Så vi har ikke sovet hele natten, som vi plejer. Og det var vores aften. Og en god, Jonas.
Det var en dejlig aften.
Hvor mange likes skal den her video have, hvis vi skal se vores arbejdsrutine?
150.
Sådan. Like.
Like.
Vi ses. Hej alle sammen, og velkommen til vores morgenrutine.
Ja, velkommen til.
Jeg vil lige sige, at den her morgenrutine, det sker hver gang Sigurd han sover hos mig.
Jeg gør det bare slet ikke.
Det begynder stille og roligt. Sigurd begynder altid at komme ud af seng, hvis Viggo ringer. Og ja, min Viggo er still my girl.
Jeg er altid sulten om morgenen.
Jeg skynder mig op, for hvis Sigurd fanger en, så skal jeg give ham noget.
Tjøs, vil du ikke lave noget morgenmad?
Jeg lavede også morgenmad i går.
Ja, Tjøs står først, så er der også ham, der laver morgenmad. Kan du ikke bare lave smoothie og æg?
Har vi det hele?
Ja.
Så begynder jeg nemlig at lave morgenmad. Det er altid mig, der gør det. Jeg begynder at lave smoothie, der er hindbær i, bananer og jordbær og is. Og det er yoghurt også, men jeg kan ikke rigtig gøre noget ved det. Hvis jeg ikke laver det her, så bliver Sigurd utilfreds. Og jeg gør det her, fordi jeg er en god ven.
Nu begynder jeg at skrive til Thomas. Nu skal jeg tage mig så ud til at slæve. Derfor Thomas skal det være med at ringe så meget. Der ikke var en monster i køleskabet nu.
Gud! Nu bærer han om en monster. Hvorfor en farve?
Den blå. Nu skal jeg tage. Skriv til Thomas.
Hvis jeg ikke laver det her, så bliver Sigurd utilfreds. Og jeg gør det her, fordi jeg er en god ven.
Nu begynder jeg at skrive til Thomas. Nu skal jeg tage mig så ud til at slæve. Thomas skal det være med at ringe så meget. Der ikke var en monster i køleskabet nu.
Nej.
Gud! Nu bærer han om en monster. Hvorfor en farve?
Den blå.
Kan man altså forstå, at jeg ikke er lyttet med Queen ham Sigurd. Værsgo. Værsgo Sigurd, jeg har en smoothie til dig.
Der er ketchup, så...
Efter vi har været i bad, så bruger vi en hel dag på til videoer, så vi bliver inspireret til aftenen. Men så banker det på døren.
Hvad var det, du sagde, Jack? Og så kommer Thomas ud.
Ja, fordi du har skrevet til her på min telefon. Nu skal Thomas ud og gæstleve. Oh yeah. Det blev han også. Sådan, mand.
Fuck, du sutter!
Okay, hvad står der?
Spyt på jorden og slik det op igen. Få en lussing af alle, der er inviteret til festen, også din holdkammerat. Den klarer du.
Peter? Nej. Det er det begge to.
Der er en af jer, der skal lave en udfordring. Skal vi ikke bare drikke, så vi taber hurtigt?
Nej. Ja, okay, hvad vælger I?
Han slikker i stedet for!
Okay, giv bare sig den der spil, det der jeg lige flyttet.
Ja. Der. Ja, der var.
Han gjorde det kraftedeme!
Fordi du sutter, Asmus!
Der er ikke der dig, Vesten.
Hvad er det næste?
Få en oldfot af din modstander en fælles, hvis du har flere modstandere.
Det der, du må.
Jeg drikker. Så skal vi.
Hallo? Hej. Nej, det går faktisk bedre. Det går faktisk. Tilbage. Alt ringer til. Og nu. Jeg er altid sådan at se gode gamle Team Pjuske videoer.
Mister en liv. I kan ikke tale.
Vodka shot.
Okay, fint nok. Det er snart holdet. Vodka shot.
Panser. Alt sejl på holdet.
Hvornår derfor, lad mig lige se, hvornår derfor set. Okay, den er snart 8 år gammel, fam. Den er snart 8 år gammel, den her. Den er snart 8 år gammel, den første. Så, we walking in the Therefore zone. The Therefore's golden time. Oh. Regnbues er en legende. Hey. Men fam, jeg tror kun jeg streamer en time. Og så skal jeg altså til at klippe lidt, redigere, klippe klistre, som man siger. Hvem har skrevet til mig? Så siger jeg hej til os. Ja, Mia.
C tier. In a similar vein, we're giving our next spot to both Heatran and Volcanion. We're gonna rank these two together because they're basically...
Starter Pokemon are some of the most beloved and memorable in the entire... The biggest official... If you haven't played a Pokemon game in a while and somebody asked you what you thought the best Pokemon of all time was, you'd probably say something like Mewtwo. If you've played a decent amount of Pokemon over the last 2 decades, you might say something like Groudon or Kyogre. If you consider yourself more than a casual fan, you'd probably answer something like Mega Rayquaza or Zacian. But if you've played a ton of Pokemon, you'd know the answer is obvious because it isn't really even up for debate. The best Pokemon ever is Incineroar. Some of you may be confused.
Hvad så Urt? Er det dig, Urt?
The Smash Bros. Ultimate character? The thing that haunts my nightmares? Yes. The thing is, what makes Incineroar the best Pokemon ever isn't immediately obvious. It doesn't have stats that make Mewtwo look like Flittle. It doesn't have some stupid signature ability. It doesn't have a move that made me throw up the first time I saw it, or any one utterly broken tool that makes it game-breaking. How could it possibly be stronger than all-time great Pokemon like Kyogre?
Skal vi snakke lidt på Discord, Urt? Kom på Dis, hvis du kan. Hallo.
If you haven't played a Pokemon game...
Nederen, Urt. Nederen. Kender følelsen. Så må vi finde ud af det på mandag, jo. Så må vi snakke sammen på mandag. Så går jeg ud. Jo, det er fint nok. Sådan er det.
In a while, and somebody asked you what you thought the best Pokemon of all time was, you'd probably say something like Mewtwo. If you've played a decent amount of Pokemon over the last 2 decades, you might say something like Groudon or Kyogre. If you consider yourself more than a casual fan, you'd probably answer something like Mega Rayquaza or Zacian. But if you've played a ton of Pokemon, you'd know the answer is obvious because it isn't really even up for debate. The best Pokemon ever is Incineroar.
The fuck?
Some of you may be confused. Incineroar? The starter from Alola? The Smash Bros. Ultimate character? The thing that haunts my nightmares? Yes. The thing is, what makes Incineroar the best Pokemon ever isn't immediately obvious. It doesn't have stats that make Mewtwo look like Flittle. It doesn't have some stupid signature ability. It doesn't have a move that made me throw up the first time I saw it, or any one utterly broken tool that makes it game-breaking. How could it possibly be stronger than all-time great Pokemon like Kyogre or Mega Rayquaza or Screamtail? Huh, that's a really good list. I bet whoever made it is, like, super good looking. Well, to understand what makes Incineroar so strong, we have to get our hands dirty. For the full picture, it's gonna take some digging. Today, I want to talk about why Incineroar is the best Pokemon ever made. To do this, we need to start at the beginning. Not the beginning of Pokemon, but the beginning of our nightmare. In Generation 7, with the release of Pokemon Sun and Moon. But Incineroar's introduction to the world of competitive Pokemon was lackluster. In fact, despite the first year of Sun and Moon using a rule set of legal Pokemon that was very limited, allowing for a lot of creativity and Pokemon selection, Incineroar's usage was below 1%. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could a Pokemon that performed so badly in its debut season possibly be the greatest Pokemon of all time? Wouldn't it be nice if that had been true? The thing is, when Incineroar was first released, it was missing something very important. But we'll get to that in a little bit. In the first year of Sun and Moon, there was basically no reason to use Incineroar because there was a better Fire-type Pokemon, Arcanine. What made Arcanine so good was, in large part, its access to the ability Intimidate, one of the best competitive abilities of all time. The combination of Intimidate and good stats, with Fire's great defensive typing, would allow Arcanine to become the #1 most used Pokemon at the time. But this blissful period, okay, Sun and Moon weren't exactly blissful, with Z-moves KOing Pokemon through Protect, but this relatively blissful period wouldn't last long. The cat couldn't be contained by a cage, and in early 2018, Pokemon made the biggest mistake of the entire franchise. Bigger even than putting this tree in Sword and Shield. They gave Incineroar Intimidate. This might not sound like a very big deal. It's not like Incineroar got a Mega Evolution or a new form. It just got access to an ability that isn't even all that rare. You can probably think of a couple pretty infamous Intimidate users right now. But unfortunately, even though it might not sound too imposing, this one change would forever alter the course of competitive Pokemon. Like I said, Intimidate is arguably the best ability in the game. There's a couple reasons why. First, in Pokemon, almost all damaging moves are either physical attacks or special attacks. And typically, the balance between them is about 50-50. Intimidate lowers the physical attack of both opponents every time the user hits the field. After just a single Intimidate, a Pokemon's physical attack stat is 2/3 of its starting value. After a second Intimidate, that's down to 50%. And these stat drops stick around until you switch your Pokemon out, making them extremely annoying. So Incineroar went from a Pokemon that basically didn't have an ability to a Pokemon with one of the best abilities in the entire game. And in doing so, all of the latent tools in Incineroar's kit were suddenly activated.
Incineroar's so stupid. I bet 6 Incineroar could beat any team, maybe 5 Incineroar. I should remake that Lions video.
Intimidate is extremely strong, but not strong enough to let just any Intimidate. Intimidate Pokemon give me nightmares. Intimidate is on other Pokemon that nobody wants to use, like Masquerain, Mightyena, Granbull. Okay, I might have tried some of these at one point or another, but normal people wouldn't be interested in using them. What I'm trying to say is that there's less Intimidate Pokemon that have been used than Intimidate Pokemon that haven't. So what makes some of these Pokemon better than others? And what makes Incineroar the best of them all? Well, when it comes to Intimidate, the ability becomes much more valuable the more often you're able to activate it during a battle. For a Pokemon like Mightyena, its base stats aren't high enough to allow it to repeatedly switch in without taking massive amounts of damage, even with Intimidate helping out. A Pokemon like Masquerain is slightly tankier, but has many more weaknesses, meaning it's still a liability to switch in. Gyarados, on the other hand, has good defenses and only 2 weaknesses, and Arcanine is even tankier. So at least part of our answer has to do with how easy it is to switch in the Intimidate user. That's mostly a combination of a Pokemon's base stats and its typing. The better your Pokemon is defensively, the more frequently you can activate Intimidate during a battle. Remember how Arcanine was the #1 most used Pokemon Pokemon in Sun and Moon's first competitive format, in large part due to its access to Intimidate, well, why don't we compare the stats of Arcanine and Incineroar? When it comes to bulk, Incineroar is strictly better. With 5 more HP, 10 more defense, and 10 more special defense, Incineroar has a meaningful advantage over Arcanine. In fact, Incineroar also has a higher attack stat. The only relevant stat where Arcanine has an advantage is its higher speed stat. But Incineroar's lower speed stat is actually more useful here. Though I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's take a step back and think about what we're seeing here. Incineroar has strictly better stats than the #1 most used Pokemon in the format. Better than #1. And it has the exact same ability that enabled Arcanine to take the spotlight. Beginning to see why this might be a problem? Okay, but let's calm down. There is a key difference between Arcanine and Incineroar. Their typing is not the same. While Arcanine is a pure fire-type Pokemon, Incineroar is both fire and dark. Surely having this extra type hurts more than it helps, right? Right? Wrong. Incineroar's typing is pretty much a strict upgrade compared to Arcanine's. Both Arcanine and Incineroar are weak to rock, water, and ground attacks. But Incineroar is also weak to fighting moves. Being a dark type, however, has several benefits in exchange for this one additional weakness. First, Incineroar gains resistances to dark and ghost, with Ghost being an especially difficult type to resist. This puts Incineroar's total resistances and immunities at 7, a stupidly high number for a non-steel type Pokemon. Second, Incineroar gains an immunity to psychic attacks. Immunities are incredibly valuable in competitive Pokemon, as they're one of the only ways to completely negate damage. And this was especially valuable in Sun and Moon because of the powerful psychic type Pokemon running around. Tapu Lele set up the psychic terrain with its ability and could output enormous amounts of damage, and the Pokemon Company then unleashed Ultra Necrozma, who had access to the signature Z move, Light That Burns My Eyes, a move with a whopping 200 base power. Incineroar being immune to these ridiculously strong attacks is just another absurd accomplishment on its resume. Being part dark type has other benefits as well. Most notably, dark type Pokemon are immune to attacks affected by the ability Prankster. Prankster is another of the best abilities in the game, and some of the most famous Pokemon in history make use of this powerful ability that gives non-damaging moves priority. Because the ability is so good, going into Sun and Moon, it was nerfed to no longer work on Dark-type Pokemon. As a slight aside, because it's so cool, in the finals of the 2017 World Championships, a player used this mechanic change to completely block an opponent's Z move. Whimsicott was using the move Nature Power, a move that is classified as a non-damaging move because it transforms into a different move depending on where the player is and what effects are present on the battlefield. The reason Whimsicott used this move is because it was paired with both Tapu Fini and Tapu Koko, with Nature Power transforming into Moonblast if Misty Terrain was up, and Thunderbolt if Electric Terrain was up. And both Z moves could be accessed by holding the Normalium Z Crystal, because Nature Power is a normal move until it transforms. In other words, Whimsicott could use both Fairy and Electric Z moves by using Nature Power. In Game 3 of the finals of the World Championships, Whimsicott was staring down a Garchomp and saw an opportunity to take a KO by switching in Tapu Fini and launching the Z move for a surprise knockout. But the opponent predicted this and switched Garchomp into Mandibuzz, a Pokemon also weak to Fairy. But because Nature Power is a non-damaging move, it gets affected by Prankster and turns into a priority move, which is great, unless your opponent is a dark type like Mandibuzz, because in that case, you will completely waste your once per battle Z move while also doing no damage. Anyway, as you can see, being immune to dark type moves can make or break a battle. But there is a drawback to being a dark type. Incineroar gains another weakness, to fighting. And of course, having more weaknesses is a bad thing, but not all weaknesses are created equally. Some types are just strictly better than others. You'd pretty much always rather be weak to Bug than to Fairy, for example. And while fighting type moves are always present in competitive Pokemon, they're rarely among the most common. And there's another reason why Incineroar's fighting weakness isn't actually that big of a deal. Nearly every relevant fighting type Pokemon is a physical attacker. This is partially because of how their stats are distributed, and partially because physical fighting type moves are far and away superior to special fighting type moves. And the reason these moves being physical is such a big deal is because of Intimidate. While taking a super effective attack means you're taking 2 times as much damage, if that attack is physical and has been reduced by Intimidate, you're effectively only taking 33% more damage. A much more manageable multiplier. And this doesn't just apply to Incineroar's fighting weakness, it's true of rock and ground type moves as well. While there are more special ground and rock type moves than fighting, the vast majority of times we see these types in competitive Pokemon, they're on physical attackers. So hitting Incineroar for actual meaningful super effective damage is a lot more difficult than it looks at first glance. The messed up thing is that Fire and Dark is such a good type combination, even not factoring in Intimidate. When I ranked every single type combination in the game, I put it at number 13 out of over 150. The fact that Intimidate just so happens to synergize incredibly well with it is just a fun little bonus. Today's video is sponsored by Honkai Impact 3rd. It's a sci-fi adventure game developed by Hoyoverse. The game now has a 3D combat system and supports free jumping, which really enhances gameplay. Players now can fight monsters and defeat bosses in the air, which, I mean, who doesn't love a little aerial combat? On top of that, players can climb onto the walls, which adds complexity. Attack stat higher than Arcanine's, it's not a Pokemon you can afford to ignore. And with its fire-type move Flare Blitz's huge base power, Incineroar is capable of KOing many frail Pokemon in 2 hits, even without super effective damage. And that's not to mention that Flare Blitz also has a chance to burn. Isn't that fun? And if you can even believe it, Flare Blitz is the least problematic of Incineroar's moves. Incineroar also gets a signature Dark-type move called Darkest Lariat. Because yeah, why not give it a signature move? Darkest Lariat was used occasionally as it ignores defense boosts, but it wasn't normally Incineroar's Dark-type move of choice. That honor instead goes to Knockoff. This 65 base power move not only removes the item of any Pokemon it hits, it also becomes 50% stronger if the target is holding an item. After the damage boost, Knockoff is comparable in power to strong moves like Stone Edge, except instead of, missing 20% of the time, it instead removes the item of whatever it hits. Knockoff means even in the situations where Incineroar isn't immediately threatening a ton of damage, it can still be a complete nuisance if you think you can ignore it. But Knockoff also isn't Incineroar's most problematic move. Now we get to talk about one of the best supporting moves of all time, Fake Out. Fake Out is a move with enough increased priority that it goes before almost all standard moves, and if it hits a target, it causes them to flinch, being unable to act for the turn. The catch is that Fake Out only works on the first turn after a Pokemon switches in. Fake Out is so strong because it allows players to control the pace of the battle. With Fake Out, you can use your partner to attack into a Pokemon that can't protect, or to buy yourself a turn to save a Pokemon that was under a lot of pressure. You can use it to temporarily invalidate a threat to let one of your other Pokemon set up. And you can even use the threat of Fake Out to scare your opponent into protecting, letting you switch out for free. You'll never be upset to have Fake Out on your team since it offers such high value and is useful in virtually every matchup. Not to mention that Fake Out is one way for Incineroar to not be bothered by its lower speed stat, since it has such high priority. But the really cool thing is that Fake Out synergizes so well with Intimidate. Since Intimidate and Fake Out both become active whenever Incineroar is switched in. As long as you can switch Incineroar out safely, you'll be able to access both Fake Out and Intimidate multiple times per battle. Gee, it sure would be funny if Incineroar got some kind of, specialized tool to let it switch out easier. Huh? Wouldn't that just be swell? Huh? It's finally time to talk about the stupidest move that they gave to Incineroar, U-Turn. This bug-type move does a little damage and then lets the user switch out. Even with every other thing the Pokemon Company gave to Incineroar, it still might have been manageable if they just hadn't given it U-Turn. It's not that U-Turn is some absurd damaging tool. It's weaker than Incineroar's other moves, and Bug isn't exactly a good type. What makes U-Turn so broken is the ability to switch out after you hit something with it. Doing a little damage and switching out doesn't sound very exciting at first glance. After all, every Pokemon can switch out. But there is a key distinction here. U-Turn lets you switch out after you attack. Normally, switching is one of the riskiest things you can do in a Pokemon battle. You're sacrificing your ability to do damage for the turn and bringing in a Pokemon who is completely vulnerable, unable to attack or protect. A bad switch can lose you the game if you let a key Pokemon take too much damage. The trade-off is that switching allows you to save a Pokemon currently in danger and bring out a Pokemon with a better matchup. Overall, I'd say it's a really well-balanced mechanic. But Incineroar completely breaks it. Thanks to its low speed stat, Incineroar is able to move after your opponent has already attacked for the turn. And with U-turn, it's able to bring in one of your other Pokemon after your opponent has already attacked. This completely mitigates the drawback of switching in one of your Pokemon and allows Incineroar to switch itself out, resetting both Intimidate and Fake Out. This one inclusion in its move pool takes Incineroar from one of the best support Pokemon of all time to the very best. Everything in its kit synergizes so well together, and it has no obvious weaknesses. Incineroar was so good once it got Intimidate that it literally killed off one of the best Pokemon of all time, Landorus Therian. Just like Incineroar, Landorus gets access to Intimidate and U-turn, but unlike Incineroar, it's better utilized as an offensive Pokemon. Because of this, Landorus has a much harder time making use of U-turn as a defensive tool, using it instead as an offensive move to do damage to Grass and Psychic type Pokemon who can give it trouble otherwise. Ever since Incineroar's hit its stride, Landorus usage has plummeted, and Landorus has never won a World Championships while Incineroar has been legal. So now that you know what makes Incineroar so strong, let's go back to 2018, when Intimidate Incineroar was first introduced. At this point, players hadn't yet realized how good Incineroar was, and in part due to Landorus being a great Z-move user while Incineroar was mediocre with the mechanic, at the World Championships that year, Incineroar was second in usage to Landorus. However, despite being present on fewer teams than Landorus, Incineroar took every spot in the top 4 finishers, while Landorus was only present on 2 of those teams. Of course, Incineroar's great performance this year would be laughable compared to the utter domination it would show in 2019. The next year's format was the final format of Sun and Moon, and it featured a different rule set than 2018. The rule set is known as a restricted format, which means that players are allowed to use 2 super powerful Pokemon on their teams. Now, you might expect Incineroar to do worse in a restricted format. After all, Pokemon like Groudon and Kyogre can much more easily deal damage to Incineroar, with Kyogre being one of the only Pokemon that can KO it in one hit. But here's the thing. The stronger the Pokemon are, the more valuable Intimidate is, the more valuable Fake Out is, and the more valuable being able to switch in one of your super powerful Pokemon for free is. Incineroar very quickly became the king. At the 2019 World Championships, Incineroar was present on over 83% of teams, the single highest usage of any Pokemon in the history of the game by a long shot. In 2018, Landorus T was used on 61% of teams as the most used Pokemon in the tournament. For comparison, this kind of usage indicates that Incineroar wasn't just good, it wasn't even just great. It was nearly mandatory on every team at the top level. Its ability to do so many different things at once, combined with various tools against the super strong restricted Pokemon, meant you needed to have a really good reason to leave it off your team. A reason only a handful of players found. Oh yeah, we haven't even talked about how its dark typing this year was a total game changer, giving it a great matchup against new restricted Pokemon, Lunala, Solgaleo, and Ultra Necrozma. One thing that makes Incineroar so hard to deal with is the fact that it's a support Pokemon. When an offensive Pokemon is dominating tournaments, players can invest in more niche Pokemon that happen to have a good matchup against it, such as Bronzong to slow down Xerneas. The idea is, as long as your Pokemon is decent enough, if your opponent brings the threatening offensive Pokemon to the battle, they'll need to deal with your counter. And if they leave it behind, then they've just given up a lot of their offense and one of their more threatening tools. It's not like there isn't counterplay to Incineroar. Pokemon like competitive Milotic and Defiant Bisharp saw play in some formats. But the problem was, nobody was relying on Incineroar for damage. They could afford to leave it behind if the opponent prepared too much for it, or keep it off the field until the threats were neutralized. Plus, these Pokemon that match up well into Incineroar tended to have a harder time when they weren't boosted by it, making them a liability at times. Ultimately, all the power was in the hands of the Incineroar player. But after Incineroar's dominance at the 2019 World Championships, there was at last a ray of hope. After 2 years being beaten down by Incineroar, players could see salvation. Sword and Shield. Pokemon doesn't get balance patches. Unlike games like Teamfight Tactics, which receive a balance patch every 2 weeks, or an emergency patch when something is really out of line, thank you Mort Dog, Pokemon at best receives balancing changes every 3 years when a new generation comes out. This was the light at the end of the tunnel. Surely the Pokemon Company would see how insanely broken Incineroar was, and nerf it in some way. Finally, we could find peace. They buffed it? They gave it one of the single largest buffs any Pokemon has ever received in the entire history of the game? Ah! Remember how we talked about how strong U-turn was? Well, the good news is that it's now mostly obsolete. The bad news is that that's because they gave Incineroar an upgraded version of it called Parting Shot. This move is just like U-turn in that it switches the user out after it connects. However, unlike U-turn, which does a little damage, Parting Shot lowers both the attack and the special attack of whatever it hits. That's right, Incineroar can now double down on physical attackers and weaken special attackers, the only class of Pokemon it couldn't weaken before. Thanks, Pikachu! There was an attempt at balancing Incineroar. Certain old abilities were reworked to be immune to Intimidate, and Fake Out didn't work on Dynamax Pokemon because they couldn't flinch. But the Pokemon who had these reworked abilities were across the board pretty mediocre, and the ability to weaken a Dynamax Pokemon's offenses with Intimidate and Parting Shot more than made up for the inability to flinch. We can't say too much about Incineroar's performance during the first 2 years of Pokemon Sword and Shield, as due to the pandemic, in-person major events were cancelled. What we can say, though, is that of the 4 online events the Pokemon Company held to replace in-person events, called the Players' Cup 1 through 4, Incineroar won all 4. Every single one. Okay, to be fair, one of those was my fault, so yeah, my bad. But in 2022, in-person tournaments returned again, with another restricted format. And Incineroar won every single major in the US, every single major in Europe except one where it finished second, every single major in Australia, nearly every single major in the rest of the world, all 3 international level tournaments, and the World Championships. Incineroar was used on 74% of all teams at the World Championships in 2022, finishing on 7 of the top 8 teams in the tournament. While this is technically lower usage than the World Championships in 2019, it's, in my opinion, just as impressive as even more Pokemon were viable in 2022 that hadn't been in 2019. So having Incineroar continue to be so mandatory on almost every team, despite the wider field, is an impressive feat. Which brings us to Scarlet and Violet, and in 2023, Incineroar was not in the game for the first year of competition. But just recently, Incineroar was added back into the game with the Indigo Disc DLC, which meant an opportunity for Pokemon to correct their mistake. After 2 generations and 5 years of complete Incineroar domination, surely this time they're gonna nerf it. They buffed it again? Are you kidding me? Okay, so this buff is smaller, but it is still a big deal. Incineroar was given Helping Hand, a move that goes before all other moves and powers up its partner's attack by a whopping 50%. This is an amazing move, and it's extremely valuable on a support Pokemon like Incineroar. However, they did add more counterplay this time around that has actually succeeded in slowing, not stopping Incineroar. First, 2 new items were added, Covert Cloak and Clear Amulet. Covert Cloak stops the secondary effects of moves, making Fake Out not flinch, while Clear Amulet prevents a Pokemon's stats from being lowered by Intimidate or Parting Shot. These items are massive, as is the fact that Inner Focus Pokemon are stronger now than during Sword and Shield, in part due to their synergy with Chen Pao and the benefit they receive from terrestrialization. On top of the items, several new Pokemon were added with anti-Incineroar abilities. Dondozo has Oblivious, making it immune to Intimidate, and Kingambit and Annihilate are both Pokemon with Defiant, powering them up if any stat is dropped. Not to mention, Terra Ghost is a great defensive tool on fast and frail Pokemon to get around Fake Out in a pinch. And so it came to be that when Incineroar was finally added to the game, top
Der er fandme mange Mankeys og Primeapes der. Annihilate.
Annihilape is the all-new evolution for Primeape that was released in Generation 9, and in competitive singles, this Pokemon was a huge problem. While it fell under the radar a little bit at first, with more powerful Pokemon like Palafin, Iron Bundle, and Fluttermane taking the spotlight, after the first few bans in Generation 9 OU, Annihilape rose from the ashes and showed us that it was an absolute force to be reckoned with. Annihilape proved far too overwhelming for the format and was eventually banned from OU. Now it is usable in Generation 9 Ubers, where it remains a solid offensive win condition. Let's take a look at what made Annihilape so hard to deal with in Gen 9 competitive singles. But first, an alarming update. The future paradox form of Sinistea, Iron Mugulus, has extended its reach from Pokemon into other video games. Here is some shocking evidence revealing that Iron Mugulus is in fact in Minecraft. I never thought I'd see anything like it. I insist that you all like this video and subscribe to speed, which is pretty fast for a bulkier Pokemon like this. Annihilape also has an excellent Ghost Fighting type combination. Ghost and Fighting are a common offensive combo. Ghost is a great neutral attacking type, and Fighting hits normal and dark types, the two types that Ghost can't hit. Having Stab on both of these types is very good, and means Annihilape doesn't really need coverage. All that being said, at a glance, this doesn't look like an Ubers level Pokemon. It looks very powerful, but nothing that crazy. Annihilape's greatest tool is its signature move, Rage Fist. This is a physical ghost type attack that starts at 50 base power. Every time Annihilape is hit by an attack, the base power rises by 50, up to a maximum of 350. This base power increase does not reset on switch out either. It remains for the entire game. This move is absolutely insane. Physical ghost moves have always been pretty hard to come by. The most commonly distributed ones are Shadow Punch and Shadow Claw, which have a measly 60 and 70 base power. Rage Fist can reach an impressive 100 base power after Annihilape only takes a single hit, which is extremely strong. And it doesn't take very long for this move to scale up and reach truly absurd numbers. As mentioned earlier, Ghost is one of the best neutral attacking types in the game, with only two types, normal and dark, that can respond to it at all. So Annihilape, with its boosted up Rage Fist and Fighting Stab to hit the two types that answer Ghost, is incredibly difficult to respond to. With access to Bulk Up, which helps you take hits to charge up Rage Fist, along with Taunt to prevent
Damn. Sad Pokemon.
Lore within the gaming universe has to be one of the coolest things ever, and Pokemon is a universe that has tons of it. From the franchise starting off with you being a 10-year-old trainer using your Pokemon to take down Mafia mob bosses, to now you being a 10-year-old boy somehow using the same power to stop people from destroying the entire universe. So we've definitely come a long way, but all of this happens for a reason, and it's because of the Pokemon universe lore. Some of my favorite pieces of lore in the entire franchise are revealed in the 4th generation, which happens to be one of the best generations, by the way, where we find out this guy, Arceus, is the god of Pokemon. He created the entire universe. With his godlike power, he even ended up creating Dialga and Palkia to control space and time, and he also made Garantina, and the rest starts trickling out from there. But there's always been a lot of mystery surrounding Arceus. For one, what is even this guy's motive? He practically is more of a bystander in this universe and not really doing much at all. Second of all, we also learned that the Arceus that we know isn't even the real Arceus. He's just a fragment of himself so that we're able to perceive him, so I wonder what the original Arceus looks like. But by far the biggest mystery on this Pokemon is what is going on with that creepy ass symbol that appears whenever you fight him. This has been a topic of debate in the community for a while, with some people thinking this symbol is just a stylistic choice and has no meanings, and while others, like myself, believe that this symbol is the single most important key to unlocking the mysteries of the Pokemon universe. And thank God, because we don't have to speculate anymore, because we kind of have an answer to this. Recently, and unfortunately, Game Freak had a massive leak within their company, and within this leak, there was a lot of cool and old information that came out, including Pokemon lore. And just to be clear, I will not be talking about any of the leaks that are out right now, or future leaks that pertain to the future of the Pokemon franchise, so you're good on spoilers. But the one thing I will be talking about, which is single-handedly the most important and interesting information from this entire Pokemon like Mewtwo. At first glance, Pokemon seems like a pretty tame universe, but that couldn't be further from the truth. We've seen time and time again Pokemon tackle some pretty complex issues, and the concept of war has definitely been one of them. And one of the reasons we know the most about its history is the cow.
Det kan jeg godt. Det kan jeg godt. Jeg prøver bare at få skrevet det her først, ikke så? Nice. Tegnefilm.
Fuck, jeg keder mig. Der er jo ikke noget at lave. Nej, men ved du hvad? Hvad? Sådan, jeg har faktisk taget noget med til os, som vi kan hygge os med. Som hvad? Det får du også se. Det skal nok blive godt. Okay, så længe det ikke får os i problemer. Okay, er du klar? Ja, kom nu for helvede. Slap af, det kommer nu. Værsgo, ven.
Nice.
Men er du sikker på, at det er en god idé at gøre på arbejde? Ja, jeg har gjort det masser af gange. Der kommer ikke til at ske noget. Fuck, jeg føler det er en dårlig idé. Fuck, jeg skal ikke have mere lige nu. Fint, så bare giv den til mig. Ja, værsgo. Men hvad hvis der kommer kunder? Har jeg taget jointen og gemt den? Hej, hvad kan jeg hjælpe dig med? 2 gange 10 række Viking Lotto uden joke. Undskyld, hvad? 2 gange 10 række Viking uden joke. Sorry, dude.
Prøver han at købe lotto, eller hvad?
For helvede, han vil have 2 gange 10 rækker Viking Lotto uden joker.
Ja,
Nå,
ja.
Okay. Sådan der. Kan jeg ikke lige bede om 200? Jo, selvfølgelig. Sådan, værsgo. Hvad fanden laver du? Jeg skal have 200. Du har tastet 2000 ind. Altså, har du tabt 17 eller hvad? Nå ja, shit. Det beklager jeg. Det fikser jeg lige hurtigt. Altså, er du helt væk eller hvad? Hvem fanden tror du, jeg var? Tror du, jeg er ludoman eller sådan noget, hva'?
Haha,
Så
ja.
hey, det var en fejl. Ja, det kan kraftedeme godt være, du tror, jeg er ludoman lige nu, ikke? Men jeg knæpper dig nu. Det eneste er her, det er din fucking leder. Jeg har bomben her nu, og jeg springer den nu.
Oh shit.
Hvad fuck skal vi gøre? Vi er dømt til døden. Okay, tag det roligt. Jeg ringer til Bettina. Hun har altid en løsning. Hej. Bettina, vi har brug for din hjælp. Starkeren er i gang med at springe tanken i luften. Det gør han altid. Okay, så i baglokalet om bag køleskabet, der ligger der en RPG, som jeg er gemt til, hvis nu sådan noget her skulle i. Okay, tusind tak, Bettina. Hej. Godt. Hej.
Ja. Gør hvad der har Bettina.
Smid bomben, når det bliver værst for dig selv. Okay, slap af. Jeg skal nok smide bomben og gå nu.
Jeg tror ikke, det var meningen, at du skulle slå ihjel.
Ja tak, så fik vi endelig ramt på ham. Hvad er egentlig det der bipper?
For nu kommer karma.
Det er ovnen.
Ja, der kom karma lige der. Det var ikke engang med vilje. Det var ikke engang med vilje. Du gjorde en god sags tjeneste. God video. Hvis du laver flere af dem her, ikke, så sopper jeg. Jeg giver dig et sop, min ven, hvis du laver flere sådan noget her. Jeg synes, du skal lave en til. Lave en episode 2. Det kunne være meget sjovt. Det gad jeg godt at se. Ærlig snak. Øj, jeg glæder mig så. Jeg glæder mig. Du skal bare vente det der. Ja, lige hvad du har lyst til. Jeg glæder mig til at se det. Jeg vil gerne se en til. Det var også god. Subtitle.
The 6th season of Rick and Morty has already ended. We don't know when the 7th season will air, but thanks to the Rick and Morty comics, we have tons of stuff to cover and do videos about. And today, I want to talk about the original Rick Prime. He is not the same Rick Prime that we know from the series, but he shares the same name with him. Surprisingly enough, these two are the only Ricks who share their names, and who knows, maybe there is some connection between that, and in this dimension, they, in fact, are the same Rick. Besides the original Rick Prime's backstory, this comic also covers the creation of the Council of Ricks, and I found this one very interesting, and today I want to talk about it. But before starting, I want to ask you all to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. I hope you all have a great day. Now let's start the video. The comics that we will talk about today are called Rick and Morty Presents Council of Ricks. It is the 9th issue of the Rick and Morty Presents comic series and was released on Oni Press on June 24th, 2020. The story takes place a long time ago. In a bar, we can see one robot who talks about Rick Prime. He says how Rick Prime used to be the top detective of the Citadel, but now he became a private eye who takes all the jobs that the low-life Ricks throw at his way. This made Rick Prime very irritated, and he just shot without a single thought. They are soon met by Rick the Fourth and Sergeant Poopy Butthole, who became sergeant after his Rick Prime's retirement. From the robot, we learn that Rick Fourth is from the universe C7218, who is the latest in the long line of Rick royalty and is a by-the-book straight shooter. Rick Prime didn't let the robot finish his sentence and shot him. Then he is taken by them via police car. He asked them the reason why they even met him, and Rick IV told him that he will find out about it soon. They take him to the Rickingham Palace, a reference to the real-life Buckingham Palace. They have a meeting with Rick Minister. It seems that before the council was created, the Citadel was ruled by one Rick, Prime Rick Minister. He meets three of them. Rick Prime isn't pleased to be there, which shows us how he dislikes the whole governing system, similar to our Rick C-137. Prime Rick Minister then tells his Morty to take Servant Poopy Butthole to the commissary to get him some of those cookies that come with their own frosting dip. This would allow him to stay alone with other Ricks to discuss their business. Prime Rick Minister starts talking about the space train, the Disorient Express. Both Rick Prime and Rick IV comment about how offensive and bad this name was. Prime Rick Minister then starts explaining how their target should be on board and how their intel says that he is carrying what they believe to be the most dangerous weapon in the multiverse. Rick Prime starts taking this thing unseriously and says how if they wanted a Rick who cared about saving the universe, they probably should have gone with a Rick that didn't spend all his money on booze and trench coats. Prime Rick Minister then reveals that the reason why they chose him to investigate this was because the seller is his old partner, the Morty Prime. He then continues and says that this is a level 9 Rick emergency, which means if he screwed up, they all would die, and he made Rick IV accompany Rick Prime. Rick Prime then says that he doesn't need anyone since he works alone. This reminded me of the moment when our Rick Prime told Cronenberg Jerry how he doesn't team up anymore and works alone. Rick IV is also not a fan of this team up, but Prime Rick Minister insists on them not being on their own. He also told them that they had taken the liberty of gathering a few other familiar Rick faces. These Ricks were Zeta Alpha Rick, Maximus Rickmus and Rictiminus Sangizamunius, Quantum Rick, and Indestructilegs Rick. The one thing that should be noted is that all of these Ricks later become the members of the Council of Ricks. We could see how different they were before starting managing the Citadel. In the next scene, they are in some kind of spaceship in the range of the Disorient Express, and they start planning their battle. Their plan is simple. They're gonna pop in there, secure that secret weapon, and get out. Maximus Rickmus and Rictiminus Sangizamunius immediately volunteer to do the killing. Rick Prime tells them to just leave Morty Prime to them. Then we see a little flashback of him and Morty and see the reason why they don't team up anymore. Rick Prime looks very sad about Morty Prime, and it seems he really cares about him. After they teleported in the ship, there is suspicious emptiness. They note that their scanners said the place should be crawling with galactic soldiers, and yet they were nowhere to be seen. Indestructilegs Rick immediately volunteers to inspect the place since he has indestructible legs, but this move turned out to be a fatal one. Invisible galactic soldiers immediately murdered him brutally. Unfortunately, I can't show you that panel because of YouTube policies, but trust me, the panel was very violent. At first, they were in shock, but they quickly started fighting back. Rick Prime found his Morty and started chasing him. He finally got him in the corner. Morty tells him how everything is not as it looks, and Rick Prime needs to blow the pod and forget about it. Then, he uses the teleportation technique and randomly goes into the Vampires and Turtlenecks universe. Then, Rick Prime and Rick IV have a discussion about the pod. Rick IV tells him how the mission stated that they shouldn't open the pod, and Rick Prime starts doubting it, and he wants to open the pod and find out why they made him do this mission. Those two have a big argument about that, but Rick Prime didn't change his mind and still opened the pod. When he opened it, he was in shock. He could see a complete exact clone of him. They were all surprised, since the cloning of Ricks was outlawed by the Rickneva Convention. Rick Prime then angrily went towards Rick IV and asked him if he knew all that, to which Rick IV answered that he suspected. According to him, it all started a few months back when he noticed a change in his best friend, Safari Rick. Then, we see a flashback of him and Safari Rick. After that, he started doing some digging and found out that those Ricklicans had infiltrated all of Rick kind, from the richest Ricks on the Rick Street to the schlubs of Skid Rick Row. Somebody is replacing Ricks with those Ricklicans, but they don't really know why or who. Rick IV then explains how those Ricklicans talk like Ricks, they look like Ricks, but in truth, they aren't Ricks. After that, Rick Prime suggests they team up against the one who tried to murder them. Immediately, every other Rick agreed. Then, the clone of Rick Prime came into consciousness and suggested they give up and let the Ricklicans kill them and take over. He was immediately finished by other Ricks, which I can't show you because of copyright things. Later, we see Mr. Poopy Butthole. He started watching TV to watch some dog videos, but then, out of nowhere, Rick Prime is seen on the screen. He told him that he hacked the dog video just so he could sneak up behind him and do that. Then, we see Rick Prime punching Mr. Poopy Butthole. They then started questioning him. At first, Sergeant Poopy Butthole was hesitant on talking since they would kill him if he told them the truth. In order to make him talk, Zeta Alpha Rick brought a bag full of snakes and a raccoon. This scared Sergeant Poopy Butthole and he started talking. According to him, the whole mission was supposed to fail. They thought they were the only Ricks smart